In addition, 889 objections were received from third parties and 9 representations in support. Frat-Free Balcombe Residents Association, said to represent more than 300 local people, also objected, with a petition attached containing more than 5,000 signatures. Turning to the key issues relating to the development, this is set out in more detail in my report, so this is just a summary. The first issue is need for development. The National Planning Policy Framework makes it clear that minerals can only be worked where they are found, and great weight must be given to the benefits of mineral extraction, including to the economy. There's new planning practice guidance on minerals, notes that energy supplies should come from a variety of sources, including both renewables and oil and gas. National policy, including the government's annual energy statement, has a clear steer in support of energy supplies sourced from the United Kingdom, confirming a need for hydrocarbon sites such as this. The continued use of fossil fuels is question representations, but this is a matter for central government, which has been clear that at least in the near future, oil and gas will continue to form part of the energy mix. As set out in my report, the application site is considered to be the best option within the licensing area for oil and gas, as it has already been drilled and has existing infrastructure and data relating to the site. It's therefore concluded that there is a need for this development on this site. In terms of highway capacity and road safety, the development would result in an average of approximately 2 HGV movements per day. Traffic would peak during site setup and demobilisation, the first and last weeks of the development, but the greatest increase would be during the demobilisation period, where there would be up to 34 HGV movements in any day, 17 HGVs coming to and from the site. At worst, West Sussex Highways officers note this represents an increase in HGV traffic of 18% on the roads, which is not considered significant in highway capacity or safety terms. The route north from the site through Balcombe is considered favourable as it's the most direct to the A23. Routes north or south of the site would pass dwellings and other sensitive uses. Traffic management plan would be required by condition to ensure that HGV movements would avoid school pick-up and drop-off times, which there's a proposed amendment to the condition relating to that, condition 10, where I've named the school. So it just says pick-up and drop-off times past, instead of saying school, would say Balcombe Church of England Primary School, just to add clarity to that. I'll run through all the amendments at the end, probably it's easier. The movement of hazardous waste past the school has been raised in a number of objections, but this is controlled by other legislation. It's therefore concluded that, subject to conditions, the development would not be detrimental to highway safety or capacity. In terms of the impact on amenity and public health, the nearest dwelling, as I've mentioned, is 340 metres north of Kent's Farm. Balcombe is around 800 metres north. The main potential impacts are through noise emissions and emissions to air. In terms of noise, the development would involve operations with the potential to be noisy, including the use of a generator, flare, and the movement of HGVs. However, the site setup and most of the testing operations will be carried out between 7:30 and 6:30 Monday to Friday and Saturdays from 8 to 1. There'd be some 24-hour activities but no overnight vehicle movements. Noise information submitted with the application indicated that noise emissions would not be significant and would meet the required standards. The County Council's noise consultant agrees with this conclusion, subject to the imposition of various conditions. Condition 14 requires a noise management plan, a specific requirement for instantaneous mitigation methods for all noise-emitting equipment and for longer-term mitigation. Noise monitoring results will be required weekly, so West Sussex County Council could ensure the mitigation measures have been implemented successfully, including the instantaneous mitigation measures required. This is therefore considered acceptable and controllable in relation to noise. In terms of air quality, the main concern relates to the flare, which would operate for 7 days to dispose. This is the method approved by the Environment Agency as the most environmentally sound operation. Emissions from the flare, as well as fugitive emissions from the site, are monitored and controlled through the environmental permit issued by the Environment Agency. This requires a range of chemicals to be monitored, including those set out in the Public Health England response. The Environment Agency, as air quality specialists, have raised no concerns in relation to the impact of emissions to air, so it's concluded this is acceptable. Overall, therefore, the development is not considered to affect amenity or public health. In terms of impacts on the water environment, the site is not within a groundwater source protection zone. The nearest is 2.3 kilometres away. There are no licensed or private abstractions within 3 kilometres of the site. As mentioned by a Factory Horsham Residents Association, I have checked this with Mid Sussex District Council and they've confirmed that there are no private abstractions either. There are small streams within 15 metres of the site access road. The main risk to surface water, therefore, is runoff from the site, as it is with any development. It's therefore important to ensure that it is contained. Potentially polluting activities would be undertaken on an impermeable membrane. Condition 6 would require the approval of works to prevent pollution, including remediation of the impermeable membrane now on site. The Environment Agency is satisfied with development in terms of impacts on surface water subject to this condition. It's considered, therefore, that the surface water is adequately protected. I would note at this point that we have had a late challenge from Factory Horsham Residents Association that came in at 9:30, which asked us to defer the determination of the application, challenging the County Council's reliance on the Environment Agency's evidence and conclusions in this regard. We've considered it in the short time we've had available and can see no reason for the committee to delay determining the application. The Environment Agency has considered the site's location in terms of a range of issues, including geology and hydrogeology, and raised no concerns. While the Health and Safety Executive has considered the potential interaction with nearby wells, as well as geological strata and the fluid within them, and equally has raised no concerns. Therefore considered that groundwater is adequately protected through other regimes, subject to surface water drainage and foul water drainage schemes, which will be required by conditions. In terms of impacts on the landscape, the site is within the high-wheeled AONB, as I've already noted. The main physical impacts on the landscape would be through the workover route to 22 metres in height and the flare to 14 metres in height. The workover route, effectively a crane, would be extended to full height for 4 weeks of the development, while the flare would be in place for 1 week, during which time the route would also be extended. There would therefore be a 4-week period when the landscape impact would be the most significant. The remainder of the time, the site would be relatively low in profile and screened by the trees. Mock-up photos provided by the applicant indicate that the rig, as the tallest piece of equipment on the site, is likely to be visible from the site entrance and farm entrance further north, with limited views from Kent's Farm and the public right-of-way to the northwest. Neither the West Sussex County Council Landscape Officer or high-wheeled AONB have raised concerns given the limited period of the development. It's concluded, therefore, that the application is acceptable in landscape terms. Finally, in terms of the impact on ecology, the site abuts ancient woodlands but is relatively distant from ecological designations, at closest 800 metres southeast of Royal Copse Local Nature Reserve. Through controlling emissions from the site, impacts on ecology would be minimised. The monitoring of water and air through the environmental permit would ensure off-site impacts are acceptable. Bats are of particular concern as the site is surrounded by trees, and this has been mentioned in a number of representations. But the County Council's ecologists raised no objection, subject to a condition controlling lighting to protect the bats. A condition would also be added requiring submission of a bat survey after the development has ceased. The county ecologists have confirmed that additional surveys suggested in a number of representations would not add to an understanding of the site or its surroundings. The potential impact of development on ecology is therefore considered to be acceptable.
No way.
Do your homework.
Do your research.
Corruption.
Could I please ask, could I ask quiet, please, while we complete?
Sounds like you've already completed.
Thank you.
Therefore concluded that subject to the imposition of conditions as amended by the updates, the development would be acceptable and would not result in any significant impacts, so it's recommended that planning permission be granted. Which sets out amendments to 4 conditions. There's also a further amendment to condition 2. Condition 2 currently reads that all operations hereby approved under this permission, including restoration, in accordance with the scheme approved under condition 17, shall cease within 6 months of the date of the commencement of the development. instead of saying shall cease within 6 months, I'm proposing an amendment to say shall be complete within 6 months, the date of this development. The other amendments are condition 10, the final bullet point asks for measures to ensure that HGV movements avoid school pick-up and drop-off times. Just to clarify, that means the local school. I put measures to ensure that HGV movements avoid cross-out school pick-up and drop-off times at Boreham Church of England Primary School. In relation to condition 12, it's proposed that the third sentence is amended to say that the final sentence to say noise levels shall be determined at Kent's Farm instead of the nearest residential premises. Condition 13, it's proposed to amend the third sentence to add the monitoring should be carried out for at least 2 separate durations during the working day, and results should be submitted to the County Planning Authority within 3 days of the monitoring being carried out or upon request by the County Planning Authority. And finally, a new condition 19 is proposed that would say prior to the commencement of development, details of the workover rig to be used shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the County Planning Authority. Only the approved rig shall be used in implementing the development. This is to secure a satisfactory development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms Mosley. I'm now going to turn to... I believe you've been advised of the traffic light system and... Okay, thank you very much. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman and members, my name is Kevin Bottomley. I lead Boreham Parish Council's working group on oil exploration, and I'm here today with the Chair of the Parish Council, Alison Stevenson. We've already made a consultation submission comprising 27 pages of objections, and clearly 5 minutes will not allow me to reiterate or explain every last point. Consequently, I will focus this statement on the objections that I feel your officers have not picked up on or stressed enough in their report to you. Firstly, traffic matters. Every application thus far from Quadrilla has all HGV traffic coming through Boreham, then retracing their route on departure. This relies upon junction 10A of the M23, which is a restricted access junction, and allows only northbound traffic to join at that point and only southbound traffic to exit. The presumption that all traffic is from the north is incorrect. It makes no sense having all the HGV movements in both directions passing through Boreham, past the church, the Scout Hut, the primary school, the station, and all the residences on the relatively quiet London road. A lorry, say from Worthing, is thus forced to go up the M23 to Crawley, negotiate that complicated junction in order to go back south towards Boreham, leaving M23 at junction 10A, go through our village, then after its business has been done, it has to drive back through the village, go north up the M23, before turning around again at Crawley in order to go south. This is daft. There is a far better route from the south, via Whiteman's Green, that passes very few houses, no church, no school, no Scout Hut or station. It is currently denied them for no good reason. We ask therefore that if you do grant consent, that this restriction is removed and that a 20 mph speed limit is imposed on any HGV traffic that does come through Boreham. Secondly, the screening opinion that no EIA is required. Your officers have relied upon the temporary nature of this particular work stage and treated it as a standalone application. This approach fails to take account of the cumulative effects of the numerous stages of oil exploration, this stage being only the second. This committee would not fall for such a cheap trick if a housing developer carved up his site into small parcels to evade his affordable housing or community infrastructure obligations. And yet this is what is proposed here. We ask that you insist on a full EIA and that this application is refused without it. Before moving on to my last point, we have numerous other concerns and objections. To list a few, the fact that the applicant is a shell entity without the means to put right any damage they cause, the noise, airborne hazards, the risks to ecology, the lack of structured aftercare arrangements, the pollution risks, crisis planning, baseline studies and subsequent monitoring and enforcement, plus lighting, landscape and visual impact issues. All these are covered in our written submission. Finally, the most glaring omission from the report by your officers is that of local public opinion. The Parish Council commissioned an independent consultative ballot by Electoral Reform Services to gauge local opinion, specifically on this planning application. The result was that a simple majority of nearly 60% opposed this very application. Local public opinion is a material consideration for planning purposes and has not been adequately addressed in the report, the officer's report. Back in 2010, when planning consent was granted for the initial stage of this project, your committee didn't get the opportunity to debate this issue like it is today. The matter was decided under delegated powers. Certainly, the people of Borkham didn't know what was being considered, and the parish council had not appreciated the impact that the proposals would have on our village. I do not exaggerate when I tell you that at times the impact on Borkham has felt like it is of biblical proportions. Village life has been hugely disrupted. People's businesses and community relationships have suffered, and Borkham has found itself the reluctant stage and testing ground for a very public and controversial battle over a hot national topic. Back in 2010, your committee didn't get the chance to protect the people of Borkham, but you have that chance today. Please don't waste it. That is what I'm asking, that you defend us, to right a wrong and to refuse this planning application. The people of Borkham are very representative and typical of the communities of West Sussex that you look after. Please, stand shoulder to shoulder with us. Do the right thing, and today, say no.
Borkham residents. Sue Taylor, Vice Chair of Fact-Free Borkham Residents Association, an organisation of 300 members living in Borkham. I am asking you to defer a decision on this application today. You have not had the chance to evaluate all the material considerations properly. You have not been given an accurate assessment of the risks to air and water pollution. If the application is approved today, it could be challenged in court. Planning guidance states that before granting permission, mineral planning authorities need to be satisfied that issues can or will be adequately addressed. This includes taking advice from the relevant regulatory body, such as the Environment Agency and Health and Safety Executive, but your officers should not rely solely on this. The EA and HSE have been deficient in carrying out their responsibilities at Borkham, and I would like to explain why, starting with evidence about the risk to groundwater. The environmental permit for the site is clear that proper well construction is critical to ensure well integrity and the protection of groundwater. But the HSE accept it did not visit the site at Borkham during well construction last year, so it cannot say that well integrity is ensured, and nor can the planning authority. We are concerned that the quadrilla well is only 10 metres away from Borkham 1, the old well drilled by Conoco in the 1980s. The HSE have confirmed that Borkham 1 has not been inspected since it was abandoned in 1987. The integrity of the old well is unknown, so the risk of drilling nearby is unquantifiable. Despite this, the planning officer's report says drilling wells in close proximity does not pose particular risks, and it cites the example of a Singleton oil field, which it said has had no problems. This is untrue. A peer review article by Durham University Energy Institute, published this year, found evidence of 2 pollution incidents at Singleton in the 1990s caused by well integrity failure, where the casings were not adequately cemented. On the evidence available, the planning officer cannot be satisfied there is no risk from drilling 10 metres from the old well. I'd like to mention further evidence which contradicts reassurances about the risk to groundwater. Independent evidence from Professor David Smythe shows there is a risk of groundwater pollution from drilling through geological faults in the Bolton area.
The EA and the planning officer's report have not recognised this risk. Secondly, groundwater abstractions. The EA have omitted the fact that South East Water have retained the Vulcan pumping station's well as a key optional water source and an important element of the company's drought contingency strategy. The Vulcan pumping well stations are in the same aquifer as the Lower Stumble site and less than 2 miles from it. The planning officer's report says the aquifer at the application site is not suitable for drinking water because of naturally high levels of methane. Yet there is no record of methane at the Vulcan pumping station. Indeed, its water requires only conventional treatment. The planning authority must find out whether the elevated methane at Lower Stumble is really natural or the result of drilling the Vulcan 1 site. They believe there was no direct connection between the tributary of the River Ouse, 15 metres from the wellhead, and the Ardingly Reservoir. The EA now accept this is untrue and has apologised, but this was not acknowledged in the planning report. Why is South East Water asking for planning conditions to be imposed that would normally be dealt with through the EA permit system? The planning officer should find out why. The EA cannot be relied on to protect air quality either. The EA permit for the site imposes no limit of any kind on the emissions from the gas flare. This demonstrates an unacceptably casual approach to air pollution. They ask for monitoring, but then specify no limits.
Shame.
Well done. Please defer a decision on this application. The planning report relies too heavily on the EA and HSE. I have shown they have both failed to carry out their responsibilities adequately. The report does not satisfactorily address the risks to air and water pollution, and this leaves the authority vulnerable to a legal challenge.
Brilliant.
My name is Louisa Delpy. I am a Vulcan resident. I'm here today as an individual to represent myself, my friends and neighbours in Vulcan, the wider community of Sussex, but most importantly, I'm here to represent my 2 small children who will inherit the legacy of this decision. My concerns are about the conditions in the officer's planning report. The conditions proposed are weak and require much tougher controls to protect the public and the environment. My concerns are informed by the difficulties we experienced last year when Quadrilla breached several conditions of its planning permission. Too many of the conditions leave the details to a later date. These include a pollution prevention statement, surface water drainage scheme, foul water drainage scheme, lighting strategy, traffic management plan, noise management plan, restoration scheme, and additional security measures. To leave this much of the application hanging in the air is unacceptable. These conditions should be fixed when the application is decided and not left until later. If you approve the application today, this will be the last chance for the members of the Vulcan community to influence the conditions under which Quadrilla will operate in our village. There is no requirement in law for the planning authority to consult us when all the plans, strategies and schemes are finally submitted. In the interests of democracy and transparency, I ask you to decide all the conditions at the same time as the application. I'd now like to highlight just 2 examples of our concerns regarding conditions, noise and traffic. There are many more. The recommended conditions on noise are wholly unacceptable. The noise recommended in condition 12 are defined by government technical guidance as the maximum which should ever be allowed. There is no justification for allowing such a high volume of noise for the operations that are proposed. The monitoring and enforcement arrangements for noise in condition 13 are bound to be ineffective. The recommendation is for monitoring to be carried out once every 7 days. The recommendation is for monitoring to be carried out once every 7 days. Quadrilla will have 3 days to submit the results and a further 2 days to implement any mitigation. Even if the County Council validates on the same day, which is unlikely, then Quadrilla could reach the noise limit for 12 days before it has to mitigate the impact. If we look specifically at the flare, the planning report says it will be operating for 7 days. This means there will be no effective control over the noise from the flare. So we ask you to reconsider the noise limits proposed in the planning report. There is no need for this development to operate up to maximum noise levels. We also ask you to reconsider the proposal to monitor noise limits at weekly intervals. We believe continuous monitoring, 24 hours a day, from the date when the development begins, would be a more effective control on noise disturbance. I'd now like to turn to lorry movements in and out of the site. We oppose the recommendation for Quadrilla to produce a traffic management plan at some point in the future. We already know about the problems of lorries passing Bolton Primary School and what controls are needed. We believe HGVs should not be passing the school during pick-up and drop-off times. We believe Quadrilla's operations must be controlled far more tightly than is recommended by the planning report. All conditions should be designed to avoid problems for the people and environment of Bolton, rather than assuming that mitigation after the event will somehow help. Finally, and in summary, I'd like to remind councillors that on the 18th of October 2013, West Sussex County Council held a full council meeting. 64 members were present, including 10 of the 13 members of this planning committee. It stated that, and I quote, "The County Council will consider granting planning permission for exploration, appraisal and/or production only after considering the following matters. Firstly, that arrangements to meet, monitor and enforce the conditions attached to planning permission, including those relating to the protection of the local environment, are adequate. They are clearly not adequate. Secondly, that local communities will be fully consulted prior to exploration, appraisal and/or production, and the developer has minimised, mitigated or compensated for any damage to the local environment. We have not been consulted by Quadrilla regarding this application. Thirdly, that community benefits from exploration, appraisal and/or production can be secured through consensual or voluntary arrangements with the developer. We are unaware of any benefits. In the terms of this motion alone, councillors must vote to oppose this application."
Well done.
Chairman, councillors, good morning. My name is Charles Metcalfe. I live about 850 metres from Quadrilla's drill site. I support what both Louisa and Sue have said today about deferring a decision on the application. I believe you need more time to consider the risks of this application because they are not addressed satisfactorily in the planning report. I also think the recommended conditions are very weak. I'd like to begin by telling you about the difficulties we experienced in Balkan last year when Quadrilla drilled its oil well. It's now well known that Quadrilla breached the planning conditions on noise levels and HGV movements in Balkan. This disrupted the lives of many villagers and threatened the well-being of our community. It's also well known that Quadrilla has breached conditions on other sites where it has operated. Our difficulties at Balkan were compounded by the failure of West Sussex County Council and the other regulatory bodies to ensure the conditions were met. We had to pay for our own noise monitoring equipment to prove that noise levels were being breached. And remember, this happened even though the spotlight of the national media was on our village. The result of the poll of Balkan villagers shows Quadrilla has no social licence here. This company's operations risk the industrialisation of our countryside. If approved, this application will lead to more and more hydrocarbon exploration sites across our beautiful county and beyond. That will inevitably increase the danger of climate change. Quadrilla's operation is also a danger and a threat to public health. You, as councillors, are the only group who are responsible for making decisions about public health. You must be sure that this application does not jeopardise our health. If you are not sure, you cannot vote in favour. If, however, you are absolutely convinced that this application should be approved, you must understand that Quadrilla cannot be trusted to comply with planning conditions. The only way left for you to protect us and our countryside is to insist on a legal agreement between the County Council and Quadrilla. This agreement would specify the conditions Quadrilla must meet. Any breach would be enforceable by an injunction in the courts. This would be quick. It would halt operations without the risk of compensation, and there would be no appeal for the company. We have produced a short document that sets out the objectives we think the legal agreement should achieve. Amongst these is a suggestion that Quadrilla should pay for permanent on-site county council staff to ensure obligations on traffic and noise levels are enforced. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss our suggestions with your planning officers. Last week, Quadrilla issued a press release which included a commitment to being a good neighbour. Good neighbours don't breach their obligations, so Quadrilla should have no trouble signing up to a legal agreement. If Quadrilla does object, we believe the company's record on planning breaches requires you to take a tough stand. In conclusion, I ask you to reject this application or to defer your decision. My reasons are these. The planning report has not satisfactorily addressed the risks of the application, particularly over water and air pollution. It relies too much on the views of the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive. We have shown, with simple examples, that these organisations have been deficient in their attention to their responsibilities, at times to the point of negligence. Approval of this application at this stage could result in a legal challenge. We believe the proposed planning conditions are far too weak and must be strengthened. Too many of the conditions are to be decided later between Quadrilla and the planning officers with no public involvement. The conditions that are recommended today rely too much on mitigating problems after the event rather than preventing them happening in the first place. We know from experience that Quadrilla cannot be trusted to comply with planning conditions. If you decide, on the evidence, to approve this application, we urge you to put in place a legal agreement that ensures Quadrilla will meet all its obligations or face a shutdown of its operations. This will all take time, so we ask you, don't rush into a decision today. Make sure you have all the facts that you need to make the right decision. Thank you.
Well done, Charles.
Good morning, Mr. Jago, and welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. My name is Rodney Jago, and I've lived in Bolton for 20 years. I have no financial interest in any aspect of the application. I wish to say that the drilling operations last summer caused no damage to the environment Had it not been for protesters, few residents would have even noticed anything going on down there.
Excuse me, would you give the decency of allowing the speaker to speak? Thank you.
In the absence of any actual damage, much has been said. In the absence of any actual damage, much has been said about noise during the short period of drilling. Well, I live in approximately the centre of Bolton and can say that despite open windows on calm summer nights, I noticed no drilling noise. Those people who claim to have been kept awake all night were either using microphones and amplifiers or perhaps camping on the road verges of the site. In a word, the operation itself caused rather less disturbance than the frequent house building and loft conversions we all tolerate as part of normal community life. There is every reason to expect the work now applied for will be less rather than more intrusive than last summer. In other words, left to itself, almost unnoticeable. Should the well ever go into production, disturbance would be even less, perhaps a couple of tankers a week. If Bolton is allowed to get on with it in peace, it will no more damage our village than existing wells have damaged Palmer's Green or Witch Farm in Dorset, as examples. Now, it is obvious that safety and the environment are important, and I commend the thoroughness of the planning report. I also recognise the need for independent monitoring, but let it be done by properly qualified bodies and not self-appointed vigilantes.
Independent.
Equally obvious is our economy's desperate need for the potential royalties taxes and foreign exchange savings from domestically produced, competitively priced and non-subsidised energy. By all means, let some of these revenues support research into cleaner energy. But if we're to provide work for young people, maintain, let alone improve our health and welfare services, we cannot burden our economy with so-called renewable energy at 3 times the cost of conventional. In addition, events in recent weeks have surely highlighted the importance of energy security. We may not yet have suffered from a faraway crisis, but the use of energy blackmail has been amply demonstrated, and we cannot know the nature and time of the next threat. In a selfish desire to avoid minor inconvenience, or by reluctance to properly control demonstrations, we must not leave a future generation unnecessarily dependent on imported energy, open to the blackmail it risks, and with an even higher national debt. To be sure, a nodding donkey outside Horsham will not materially boost the nation's energy. But to borrow a quotation, nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could do only a little. I urge that the application be approved and that the authorities ensure any protests are entirely peaceful and not permitted to obstruct the work authorised, or for that matter, the legal activities of our farmers or the public at large. Thank you, Madam Chairman.